How's it going, everybody? Here to do another little tour, huh? Today, we're gonna be doing a neighborhood known as Bensonhurst, huh? What do you know about Bensonhurst? You're about to learn a lot more. Anyways, I'm actually in the driveway of a friend of mine here in the neighborhood, longtime resident. We'll talk about this a little later, don't you worry. But before we start, Cam, how are you?
So ready.
Yeah, this is gonna be a good one, man. I'm excited. A lot to cover. Before we start our little journey in the homeland of Carl Sagan and Sandy Koufax and Larry King. Before we start a little journey, guys, check out the Patreon. Come on, check out the Patreon. That's how we fund these things. Really important, keep growing this thing, baby. Also some extras on there, and also like and subscribe. Just do it now. If you've already seen these videos, you know that's what's gonna happen anyway. So just do it now, get out of the way. All right, before we start, Cam, are you ready? For the love of God, are you ready?
It's time to get it going.
Yeah. Let's go. All right, so let's just start right at the beginning. Before we even get into the neighborhood history, remember that Brooklyn, and a lot of Brooklyn, was actually home to the Canarsie Indians that were a subsect of the Lenape Native Americans who were here, and they were all under the Algonquin language group. Very important to keep in mind. I can't go into all that, but I do have a video on the Native Americans of New York, which you can check out. There you go, way to start the video. But we are in Bensonhurst, which was part of New Utrecht, which was one of the 6 towns created under the Dutch in 1661. There was actually one that was created by the English during the Dutch times, that's Gravesend, but this one was New Utrecht, named after Utrecht, which was the 4th largest city, is the 4th largest city in the Netherlands. Utrecht is the actual name. I know it sounds like a part of the male anatomy, like right behind the prostate or something, but that's what all this area was kind of part of. Look at that, New Utrecht Reformed Church here. This actual church dates back, well, the congregation dates back to 1677. This actual church building was built in 1828. Kind of nuts. This has been here for a while. And speaking of male anatomy, I'm actually standing next to the Liberty Pole, which is called that because this is the 6th one of these poles that they put here since 1783 to commemorate the War of Independence. That was finished here in New York when Washington came back and took it away from the Brits. Spoiler alert, the United States won that, not to rub faces in anything, but this was actually the spot of the original one that was put here in 1783. There have been 6 since. I've talked about Liberty poles as well because they were kind of like the symbol of freedom and liberty that dated back to even before the War of Independence. And in fact, the Battle of Golden Hill, which was arguably the first skirmish of the Revolutionary War, took place in Lower Manhattan around the issue of a Liberty pole that was located next to City Hall, today's City Hall. Kind of nuts. Remember, these symbols are very important, man. Highly charged things, especially when people are fighting for their freedom, etc. I mean, you can look back on history when people get their flags are outlawed and all this kind of stuff. Liberty poles were kind of like that. And remember that Brooklyn itself was the name of one of those 6 original Dutch towns, named Breukelen, after another town in the Netherlands. And Breukelen actually swallowed up other towns and became its own city in the 1800s, but it swallowed up New Utrecht in 1894. Look at that. Kind of crazy, right before consolidating with New York City, with New York in 1898, which I've talked about in every freaking video I've ever done pretty much, because it's one of the most important things to ever happen in the city. We got a lot to cover, man, so I got to keep moving. Cam, how do we do there, huh?
Lovely.
Cool spot. All right, let's go. All right, so as the neighborhood kind of got settled, it became kind of like a let's call it a suburb, right? So I'm actually here in what's called Milestone Park, and it's called that because of the milestone right behind me. That was the oldest milestone in Brooklyn. In New York, actually, 1741, it was put in front of the Van Pelt Manor. The actual original milestone is located at the Brooklyn Historical Society. But then they put this replica here in the 1900s. Anyways, the idea was that it was a road that led you out, and here was the Van Pelt Manor. Townsend Cortelyou Van Pelt, which sounds like an 80s movie villain. Like, the Van Pelts are gonna tear down the Cineplex. We gotta stop them. But that's actually what was here, and it burnt down in the 1950s. It was actually deeded to the city by Townsend Cortelyou Van Pelt in 1910, and then it actually burnt down in the 1950s. So no Van Pelt Manor, but that was kind of what was here. It was all farmland. In fact, Brooklyn was called America's first suburb because this is where the people who lived in New York and New Amsterdam, they came and they built their little homes to get away from all the hubbub and the, I don't know, the taxis on horses or whatever the heck, and they built their stuff out here. You know, Brooklyn, America's first suburb. Look at that. I mean, the first flag probably had a minivan on it. But that was what was out in this area, and this park kind of commemorates that. Keep in mind, because these were suburbs, they were farms. What happens with farms in the 1600s, 1700s, and early 1800s in New York City? Slaves. Yeah. So just to keep in mind, this area, even a little further north to places like Flatbush and everything, a lot of slaves. In fact, in Brooklyn, about 20% of the population were enslaved. That's crazy. Bensonhurst gets its name actually from the Benson family. Egbert Benson, Benson, that's a nice little name. Arthur Benson, these were very important people. Egbert Benson, all right? Egbert Benson was, he was actually involved in the Continental Congress during the Revolutionary War. All this stuff was a big name. His son, Arthur Benson, became the head of what eventually turned into today's gas company, which is National Grid. It was actually the Brooklyn Gas Company became National Grid, which still provides New York City its gas, along with all those halal carts. Anyways, the Bensons sold the area. They bought this area from the Polemis family early on, and they held on to it until the early 1800s when the Bensons started to sell it off. And one of the things, they actually sold it to this man who wanted to develop like this little community, a little kind of gated community type thing, only under I guess the pretense that they name it after them. So it had the name Bensonhurst by the Sea. Bensonhurst by the Sea, right? But it had the name Bensonhurst by the Sea, and eventually it dropped. So it kind of extended down to what is today Bath Beach. And it was like this little subdivision, pretty much. Pretty cool, huh? James Lynch was the guy who wanted to turn it into this resort in like the 1880s, around that time, because this was kind of further out. But as the trains started to get out here, this became a possibility. Unfortunately, in 1893, there was a panic of 1893. Lots of panics, by the way. I don't know if you knew this, 1873, 1907, lots of panics, and it kind of kept the development from growing as much as it could, but it eventually kind of, started to develop. And it was around like 10,000 people in this whole area, which is not a lot, up until like the early 1900s, late 1800s, but it was gonna change, and we're gonna talk about that as we go. All right, so some things started to happen here to kind of develop the area and take it in a different direction. And one of those things was the immigration of, well, the migration, let's say, of the Italians. This is actually one of the little Italies, I guess, of New York City. Now, obviously, the Italian immigration from Italy itself has kind of slowed down, but this area was kind of one of the little Italies here. So Little Italy obviously is down in Manhattan. We covered that in another video. All right, you gotta go ahead and watch that. But as the Brooklyn Bridge opened, 1883, other bridges opened, the subway, all that stuff started connecting further parts of Brooklyn, people moved on up. They left that Little Italy, went to cheaper places, and like I said before, this was like a little suburb. So people, remember in mid-1900s, mid-1900s, you had a thing called white flight. We've talked about this in other videos. After World War II, you had people leaving the cities, you go into suburbs, but people even within the cities would go to more suburban areas, and one of the people who did that here, because it was kind of a suburby area, was the Italians. So in the mid-1900s, you had Italians kind of making their home here, and that's why I stopped right here. We're on 18th Avenue here, which is also known as Cristoforo Colombo. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that guy. Don't badmouth him around here. You'll feel the wrath, by the way. You'd think he actually discovered America or something. But it's all named after him. And I'm in front of Via Abate Alba, which has actually been here since 1978, which was around the time that the Italian population here hit its peak in 1980. There was about almost 80% Italian in Bensonhurst. That's crazy. That's a lot of Italians here. Or Italian Americans. It's since kind of lowered, but that was kind of what was going on here. So throughout the 1900s, you had this area be Little Italy, kind of in a way. Still some social clubs. The mob had a strong grip on Bensonhurst. The Bensonhurst crew, Sammy the Bull Gravano, famous Gambino crime family right hand of John Gotti, famously hung out in this area. There was actually an assassination attempt, failed one, on Gotti himself. He wasn't actually in the car that ended up exploding, but Sammy the Bull Gravano ended up turning state's evidence on on Gotti and got him convicted finally after failed attempts at convicting him. Samuel Gravano, after serving time in jail, became the second most reviled profession in the world, which is YouTuber. He's got his own YouTube channel now. That's what happens. You go from mobster to YouTuber. And remember, the Italian immigration came over to the United States in the 1800s, 1870s, 80s, 90s, and early 1900s because Italy was a new country. Remember, Italy was made up of different regions that eventually united, finally in 1870 completely, to create a country of Italy, which, as old as the Roman Empire is, Italy is a young country. So there were problems with that, especially in the south of Italy, when the economy changes everything and people came here to make money and live and survive. So it was a big issue. And then, like I said, as they moved on up, they moved to areas outside of Little Italy and outside of the city, places like Long Island as well, in the mid-1900s. So here we are, Cristoforo Colombo. This is also where during the summers you have the La Festa de Santa Rosalia, which is actually the patron saint of Palermo, Italy, in Sicily. Look at that, and they have the feast every year. It's pretty fun. In case you don't know, Santa Rosalia, she was famous for having died, and then they exhumed her body to take it around the city when there was a plague, and it supposedly cured the plague. That's how you cure a disease. I guess they didn't try everything for COVID. So they honor her every year, which is kind of an interesting thing. And also you have different landmarks here. So for example, Lenny's Pizza's down on 86th Street, but that was famous for its inclusion in the opening scene of Saturday Night Fever. Did you ever see Saturday Night Fever, Cam? No. No? Good Lord. These young kids, they gotta see their cinema. Anyways, the 1977 film where he walks with the pizzas, that's Lenny's Pizza. Closed recently, unfortunately. I don't know if you guys know Saturday Night Fever. That's the one where he's like, don't touch the hair, watch the hair. I spent a lot of time on my hair, and he hits it. It's my John Travolta. Pretty good. Yeah, a lot of Italian influence in this neighborhood. Pretty cool, but we're only getting started, so let's keep it moving. Oh, and also, Via Abate Alba, it's been here since 1978, which is pretty cool. Nice little cannolis in there. All right, another big immigrant group that was coming here to Bensonhurst in the early 1900s, around the same time as the Italians, was the Jewish immigration here. In fact, Bensonhurst was big for its Sephardic Jewish population, which came over around the same time as the Ashkenazi, which are the majority of the people who came over to New York in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But all told, from the years 1881 to like the 1920s, it's like around 3 million Jews emigrated here to the United States, and most of them stayed here in New York. It was a huge influx, and a lot of them went to the Lower East Side. And then, as Brooklyn became more interconnected, they came over here. Look at that. Anyways, I'm standing here in front of Magen David Synagogue, which was actually established in 1921, and it was actually home to Syrian Jews from Aleppo. There's also another synagogue down on Ocean Parkway, which is home to Syrian Jews from Damascus. Look at that. Kind of interesting. Ocean Parkway, little side fact, I don't know if you know, Prospect Park has Eastern Parkway going east, Eastern Parkway, look at that, and Ocean Parkway on its west side going towards the ocean. Ocean Parkway, Eastern Parkway, what? Isn't that crazy? And they were both designed by the designers of Central Park. Look at that, the parkways. They're called parkways because the park was right there. Wow. Anyways, they called Ocean Parkway Aleppo in Flatbush because of the population there. So there you go. That was a historian named Joseph A.D. Sutton who called it that. So these are all the things that are going around at that time. And that one over on Ocean Parkway is called the Ahiezer Synagogue. So these are all things that are happening in this neighborhood. Once again, Bensonhurst, Italians, Jewish population, and more, which we're going to talk about as we go through this video. But you'll see little things like this in Bensonhurst indicating that diversity as well. Let's go. We got a lot to cover. Enough rambling. All right, I'm here with my little tea, trying to stay warm. My feet are soaking wet and freezing. You're welcome. But anyways, I'm here to talk about how the neighborhood started to change again in the mid-1900s. Now I'm standing in front of what's called Shore Haven. This was a huge development that was actually built in 1949. Now technically I'm in Bath Beach, but remember I talked about Bensonhurst on the sea, right? We're actually right next to the water. This actually had a big effect on Bensonhurst as Bensonhurst kind of slowly started to grow in the mid-1900s, etc. But this was actually a development built by a man named Fred Trump. You guys know that name, Trump? I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but Fred Trump's son, you might know, is a famous basketball shoe designer. But Fred Trump, this was kind of his stomping ground. This is one of some of his biggest developments. He started to branch out his kind of real estate empire. So he started with Shore Haven, which in 1949 was the largest development in Brooklyn. It's a big deal. Then he went to Beach Haven, and then in Coney Island, and also demolished Steeplechase Park, famously, by bringing bikini-clad women with sledgehammers and his friends with bricks throwing through fancy windows of Steeplechase Park, this iconic theme park. You know, always the showman. And he did it last second so to avoid getting landmarked. That's a sneaky guy. But anyways, all this kind of was happening around that time. Now, this is an interesting point because Bensonhurst didn't suffer from the same phenomenon that other neighborhoods in New York that were traditionally industrial did. So when industry left the cities after World War II to cheaper, neighborhoods outside the city, you had highways being developed, and you also had white flight, people going to the suburbs. That emptied out neighborhoods in New York, made them really decayed and awful. This neighborhood was the opposite. The people from those neighborhoods came here. The Italians and other ethnic groups went to neighborhoods like this and out in Long Island. This is kind of like the suburbs, even though it's in New York. So this became a predominantly Italian neighborhood, even more so around that time. By 1980, almost 80% of the neighborhood was Italian. Made it very ethnically I was going to say monogamous. That's not the right word. I was going to say ethnically homogenous. And that kind of like closed, society, I guess you want to call it, created some other issues with other ethnicities, which I'll talk about as we go. So this is technically Bath Beach, so don't, freak out. How you doing? Don't freak out and say it's not Bensonhurst, because I guess it's not, but it did have an effect on Bensonhurst, and it is kind of part of the history, so we'll talk about that. Anyways, let's keep it moving. It's funny, that guy could have easily gone around. I moved off to the side so I wasn't in the way, but hey, what can you do? I'm just a lowly YouTuber. All right, so when you have a big mix of people in one area, you're gonna get some kinds of, problems sometimes, and that's just natural. I'm actually standing here at the intersection of Bay Ridge Ave and 20th Ave, and this is actually the site of a murder in 1989, August 23rd, 1989. A man named Yusuf Hawkins and his friends came here to Bensonhurst from East New York, their neighborhood. They were black, and they came here looking to buy a used car. A group of Italian youths came and, beat them up really, really bad with baseball bats, all kinds of things, and then shots were fired and Yusuf Hawkins was killed. They think that they had actually mistaken them for someone else and other people who were going to come into the neighborhood who were associated with one of their friends who was throwing a party that night, but they were killed nonetheless. So this man, Joseph Fama, was convicted of the actual murder. He was sentenced to over 32 years in prison, and this man named Keith Mondello was also charged with lesser charges, and he only got a little over 5 years. How you doing? And then Al Sharpton, you guys may know, came down here and he protested. He was down here. There was marches all after the actual incident. So because of the 80s, you had all this racial tension in parts of Brooklyn and in the surrounding areas because of these mixing of neighborhoods. Remember, I was saying that this neighborhood was completely Italian. There were people who had left the city and moved out to neighborhoods like this that were a little more isolated, etc. And by 1980, this was over 80% Italian. And they were kind of keeping their neighborhood, Italian. And then, black people were kind of segregated over into East New York and things were divided up. So it created tension in lots of neighborhoods. So this was one of 3 major high-profile racially charged murders and deaths in the 1980s. Willie Turks in '82 in Gravesend, and then you had Michael Griffith in 1986 in Howard Beach, which is right near here as well. So because of the racially charged atmosphere, you had lots of marches and lots of press surrounding these kinds of issues. And you had even Al Sharpton coming here multiple times, including after the verdict was handed down. One of the verdicts was handed down, and he was actually stabbed in a park right near here by a guy in a Yankees jacket. The moral of that story is, I don't know, go Mets. But this was a really intense episode. There's actually recently a documentary in 2020 made about this on HBO. Not to plug some other TV channel or whatever, unless they want to give me a TV show, But it was called Storm Over Brooklyn about this in 2020. It really divided the city, like many things did back then. I've talked about it in past videos. I talked about Bernard Goetz, in the subway vigilante. I talked about Gavin Cato in Crown Heights. All these different things happening at this time. But this was another one of those episodes. Look, you got to talk about this stuff. This is very important in Bensonhurst history. It's not all cannolis and Chinese food. This is real history, baby. You gotta know this stuff. So, anyways, that's the story of Yusuf Hawkins here, and this is where it happened. Let's keep it moving. All right, so now we're going to talk about the more recent developments in this neighborhood, and the biggest recent development is that it's now Chinatown. So I'm on 86th. Earlier we were on 18th. 18th was Little Italy, and that's the history there. We're on 86th. Now this is pretty much the heart of what is the Chinatown in this neighborhood. It's the fastest growing ethnicity in this neighborhood, along with the Latin American population, which is also here. But it's almost 40% of the neighborhood is the Chinese population. Now I think the Latin American is around 13%, so they're growing as well. But important thing to keep in mind, Chinatown is a fairly recent development, well, the Chinatowns, I should say. Now, these are all recent developments. The Chinese influx didn't really start until the 1960s. Keep in mind, a lot of the reason they were kind of held down was because of laws being passed and racism in the late 1800s. In fact, 1882, there was a law passed in the United States called the Chinese Exclusion Act. Hello, that's a real thing. This is something everyone who lives in New York should know, lives in the United States should know, along with don't stop in the middle of the subway stairs. Subway. Yeah, that's really loud. Anyways, so this Chinese Exclusion Act, along with quotas that were implemented in the early 1900s, 1924 to be specific, kept the immigration down. It wasn't until World War II, when we were on friendlier terms with the Chinese, that the Chinese restrictions were lifted. And then in 1965, the Hart-Celler Act was passed, changing the quotas, getting rid of all that. So here you have on 86th Street, kind of the center of Chinatown, which is pretty cool. You may recognize the elevated railway here from some stuff. I'll talk about that at our next stop and last stop. Keep in mind, this is one of the many Chinatowns in New York. You have Flushing, Elmhurst, you have Sunset Park, you have Lower Manhattan. These are all kind of new things, you know, in the last, like I said, handful of decades, but you know, a lot of Chinese, and this is very important because this makes the neighborhood diverse. We talked about the Jewish and Italian immigration. There was also early on Irish, and then, you know, now you have Latin American. It's a huge mix, but once again, keep this in mind. This all has to be protected. It is a city policy, baby. You got to protect people who are more subject to, you know, changes in the economy and market forces and things like that, because right now New York City is booming in prices and real estate. So these are a lot of times it is the diversity that is the first thing to suffer. So thing to keep in mind right there, very important. And the neighborhood, because it's changed, has also dropped. The amount of Italians in the neighborhood have dropped. It's around like 10% Italian American at this point, when in the 1980s it was at you know, almost 80%. So that has also kind of changed. But yeah, I was talking about how the, you know, there's other neighborhoods that are Chinatown. I did a video on Flushing, you should watch that. I did a video on Elmhurst, you should watch that. Another one on Chinatown. This is all stuff connected, baby. Just open yourself a bottle of Dom Perignon and sit and watch some videos and, you know, taking some history. All right, let's wrap this thing up. Well, we kind of made it to the end here, guys. I'm actually standing here in front of Steve Campanella's house. This is the last stop, baby. As you can see, all the pop culture references, he's been collecting them over decades in his life. He's been here for 25 years. Very nice guy. Let us in, got with cool videos. Important point about Bensonhurst, lots of pop culture refs here, huh? A little breathe for you kids. They filmed the famous chase scene from French Connection, the 1971 film. You know that film, Cam? Now you do, because I told you about it earlier, you young freak. But that's where they filmed the famous car chase under the 86 subway street. Funny story, they didn't actually get permits for all that. The director actually had the stunt driver drive and just kind of like winged it. A lot of the people and everything are seeing these people drive like, you know, like 90 miles an hour. They're like, what the hell's going on? And they bribed the MTA guy to allow them to film on the subway. They bribed him with $40,000 and a one-way ticket to Jamaica. That's crazy. Well, there you go. There's your price tag if you ever want to bribe the subway to do something. But that's a true story. Also, you have other videos like, or movies. The John Wick 3 scene on the horse. That was also right under this subway line. You have Welcome Back, Kotter. Huh? Welcome back, Kotter. Welcome back. Your dreams were your ticket out. Huh? Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. That was pretty good, right? Great theme song. That was John Travolta's big break. We already talked about John Travolta and Saturday Night Fever. A lot of references here, very cool. But you see all the pop culture references here in Steve's yard. I'm rambling. We're at the end of the video, man. Anyways, we talked a lot about the history, went on quite the journey. Not bad for just a guy and his camera guy, huh? Cam, we're doing pretty good here.
Not too shabby.
That being said, if you guys enjoyed the video, check out the Patreon, baby. That's how we fund these things, keep the lights on, keep our feet dry, I don't know. Also, too, like and subscribe. That's the least you can do. All right, we got to get this thing going. We got to get out of here. Cam, did you enjoy it today? That was pretty nice. Even though it rained, we went through quite the elemental journey and odyssey, but we made it to the end. You all right?
I'm a little wet, but I'm good.
Yeah, it's okay. It'll dry in due time. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for sticking around till the end. I don't know, till the next one. See y'all later.